The last video I was making got cut short, and that's because my phone ran out of memory. And that's never happened where I notice that I'm talking and the video's not recording, and I'm thinking, I don't remember stopping it, because usually I just do it in one long clip and then edit it. Sometimes I make shorter clips. So then I went back to the video and I looked at what I was talking about at the end, and sure enough, I had extrapolated 3 more points, but it wasn't on the video. So I looked and my phone had indeed run out of memory. So note to anyone who ever wants to do self-dialogue, you need a lot of memory. I have an iPhone 6s Plus, and it has 128 gigabytes, which was the biggest size at the time. The 7 comes with 256, and I have a 7 in my possession. I'm keeping it safe for somebody, and I just did a test clip, and the sound quality is actually a lot better because I think the phone has a better microphone and a better speaker too. So it might have been smart of me to actually upgrade my phone to the 7 right away, but I couldn't have predicted that I was going to do this many videos. So getting the phone you want with the most capacity is good. And then one would also need a iCloud account or some kind of uploading service, because there's still way more gigabytes of video than the phone. So if each video is maybe 5 gigs and the phone is 128, it's only going to store like 20 videos, but I have about 280. So half of them are on a hard disk at home, all of them are in the cloud. I have a terabyte of storage, which right now is $12.99 a month in my country's currency, which actually I think it's $13.99 a month. And that's just a way to keep the conversation and all those hours safe. I will be upgrading to the next iPhone when it comes out in a few months, and I'm still very low on memory on my phone, so I'll have to find a solution soon. I did buy some kind of little external hard drive on Indiegogo. That was an extra 256 gigabytes or something, but the thing with Indiegogo is that it says predicted shipping in May and you get it like the next year in July sometimes. At least I bought something 2 years ago and I still haven't received the product, though I have got a few things on there that were really cool and I did actually get at some point, which is nice. But yeah, it's not something to rely on for the date. And also they usually put this really amazing product and then you buy it and then they skipped a ton of features because they couldn't really fit that into the budget. So yeah, and I had to stop having those emails because I'd see something and be like, that's cool, I want that. So no more of that, but it's still a pretty fun website to shop on. And one thing I forgot to mention was I was having lunch with some friends and we were just chatting about stuff, and then one of them brought up how sometimes people have this feeling like they're in a movie or being recorded all the time. And then I said, that's called the Truman Show delusion. And then they said, yeah, that's right. I think I read it in the New Yorker or the New York Times or something. I can't remember what they said. But I was just talking to myself on a video about that before lunch, and then I went to lunch and that was brought up. And I was on the video before also talking about how this is happening, where I'll be talking about something or thinking about something, and then the next scene in my movie or soon after, there's something very related, and it's not really a synchronicity. It's more like a pseudo one because there's nothing to really follow there. It's not a sign to follow, it's more just a signpost to look at and notice that there are signs, but it's not necessarily one to follow. And then I was sitting there having that sense like, yeah, this is what happens and it's not surprising. And it could just be getting my brain ready to start following some kind of signs when there are ones to actually follow. So the couple of extrapolations that I missed out on, that's never happened, where I've lost some of what I've said, and I think I was doing a pretty good job, and they're lost forever. And it doesn't really matter, but I will talk about them again. Something I wrote down that is just one of those sort of statements. I wrote, the ego constricts the being from moving most beautifully and effectively in the field of love. Aww. And I was talking about how movies are possibilities, and a brain in map consciousness, or one that has that susceptibility, even if it's not in that state, has this dimension of seeing possibilities or operating in possibilities. So movies can actually activate that dimension even more, because even though movies are fiction most of the time, they're still possible. There's still possibilities. And a brain that operates in possibilities sometimes sees how those situations and scenarios could be possible, especially because they resonate with possible past experience that one has had. So it resonates with that and activates it more. And a brain that's operating mainly in the dimension of thought, in the domain of thought, is moving in the domain of probabilities. It's looking and making calculations and trying to make predictions, not seeing possibilities. It's not seeing and the field of possibilities expanding based on what one sees. It's actually narrowing down the field of what one is making salient, and then narrows it down further to what's probable based on what the past associations are making salient. So it really limits the game of life. So that was just another thought on how movies relate to this state, and how sometimes we explain our states based on movies, or sometimes movies can actually resonate and accentuate those states or understanding of those states that we experienced in the past. And the brain is trying to make sense of possibilities, so if it sees something that helps to make sense of some of the things that possibly happened in the past, it will use that information. But then sometimes it can almost reactivate those states in the process. Because the brain wants to move in possibilities. It doesn't want to live in this limited domain of these probabilities that have been programmed into us. It's like advertising. The advertising companies know the probability that somebody's going to buy something based on the advertisement. And so our past memories are like advertisements that are making certain things probable, because it's changing what we see, narrowing down what we see and what we calculate. And this was the good one that I missed out on because the recording stopped. It was really good, so I don't know if I can do the same, and I wouldn't even know if I did it the same or not. So just as the ego produces hallucinations, thoughts, and beliefs, because the ego is just a mirage of these circulating thoughts and beliefs. So it's a hallucination of the circulating thoughts and beliefs, the movement of the thoughts and beliefs. The state of insight or seeing produces more seeing. So the state of ego thought, which is a hallucination, produces more thoughts and beliefs and hallucinations. And the state of insight or seeing or possibilities produces more seeing or possibilities. So that's why it could be important to limit bandwidth, because reading something like a short paragraph might actually create the equivalent of 1,000 pages of insight and information and seeing in the brain. Whereas in the state of ego thought, if one reads 1,000 pages, one might actually retain a page. And that doesn't even mean that it's necessarily understanding. It might just be memorization. Whereas in the state of seeing, reading that paragraph flowers the understanding, so more information is produced from that prompt of reading. And these aren't exact calculations, I'm just making up numbers for the sake of trying to illustrate what happens in these states, possibly. So others are trying to consume and remember and believe from this bandwidth that we have access to in terms of information overload. So consume as much information and store it and remember it and have it as knowledge for later. But when you can really see, you don't need to remember, because the seeing of something extrapolates and flowers even more information, because the brain is operating on a different algorithm based on seeing. So the ego, which is a hallucination and full of thoughts, can only produce more of that, whereas seeing creates more seeing. And it's not based on what you saw before. It's always starting again from zero, pretty much. So I don't think I did that as good, but that's okay. And I was thinking about how a lot of the ways that we act are kind of robotic. They're kind of computerized. We're acting based on programs. And so we're kind of like computer people. And a computer could almost simulate our life because we're pretty predictable. Whereas I don't think a computer could ever simulate or replicate mania. It's just too random and chaotic, in a good way, in much of it. And I think that relates to what I was talking about in an earlier video quite a while ago, about how I feel like mania is our safeguard against being computerized and ubiquitized and turned into kind of drone-like human bots, if that hasn't already happened. And I was looking at a webpage talking about some people that are studying bipolar and creativity and trying to find the links. And I was thinking about how this process is creativity itself. And then professional people come along with their categories and their education and say, that's bipolar disorder. But it could actually just be human creativity. So by saying, oh, that's bipolar disorder, it is a human created construct that we superimpose over the original flowering of whatever this is. And back to the C frontal cortex. I feel like the prefrontal cortex could turn into the C frontal cortex, in that its volume and structure is now diverted to seeing, which is related to insight and perception action, not pseudo-seeing, thought, calculating which program according to memory to activate, and then inaction because it's not adequate for the actual moment, it's projecting memory into the fresh new moment. So when the ego is non-functional, the brain can now use that area for other things. Just like if an area of the brain gets injured, sometimes the brain will be able to use a new area of the brain for that task in order to allow the body to continue to move. So if the ego structure is damaged, now the brain can actually use all of that area of the brain, because the ego structure is just a bunch of noise and thoughts and sounds and energy that's kind of like damaging that area. So it's almost like the opposite of having a physical injury that the brain has to now compensate for. It's like we have this mental injury, but the mental injury is actually the ego structure and all of our past hurts and memories that we've accumulated to use against the moment or make us feel comfortable or secure or whatever. So that part is actually injuring the brain. So when this injury stops happening, the brain can actually put energy towards allowing that brain area to be utilized for what it's meant to be utilized. And the universe is trying to break up this injury, all of this ego complex, so that this energy of the universe can come in and change the function of that area of the brain. And that might sound kind of strange, but a lot of people have synesthesia where they taste sounds or hear smells. So the brain is very changeable and fluid, even within what we know can happen. And what happens in map consciousness is totally unknown. And even with what I'm talking about right now and all I've talked about, it's still very limited compared to the unknown infinity that is this beyond that we can actually connect with, that can never be put into words. Even putting it into words in any form is somewhat limiting it. And at the same time, that's kind of important because it's important to stay in the world of words somewhat, because that's how the world is right now. But by having a conversation with myself the way I want to, at least I'm living in the context that I see. And by seeing, I create this context. And perhaps at some point it gets passed on to the next generation, whether it's an alteration in the morphogenetic field, which perhaps changes the genetics and passes it on. And I had this thought that maybe that's kind of what's happening in autism in a way. There's this dimension that wants less words. And whether it's through the map conscious process, but now it seems like something has been passed on to the next generation to be perceiving in a different way and not acquiring words the same way. I feel like the